Welcome to our reading the Bible out loud, the whole church reading the scriptures out during Holy Week, hoping to read through the whole Bible. We've been going all day today and half a day yesterday, and we're up to 1 Samuel, so 300 pages in of the Bible, which has, on this Bible, we have, let me see how far it goes, up to 1,251. So, it's not bad, quarter of the way. So what we'd like to do is invite people to come. If you're watching, I have the sheet here, the sign-up sheet. This is the back of the church. We've got plenty of times. We've got times at 8:30 till 9, 9:45 till 10:30 in the morning, from 2:15 to 5:15 is free, from 6:45 till 7:15 is free, and from 8:30 if you want to sign up. All the dates are here. So I'm doing some of the evening shift. My voice is a bit sore, like many of them that I've been reading. I've just done about half an hour. The time here has just gone 10:15, about 10, it says 10:15 on the clock here. And you have a little clock there, so your slot is normally 15 minutes. You can do 1, 2, 3, or 4, as many as you like. And we just read it. What I found is, as I'm reading the scriptures, the church is completely empty. We've just got all the lights on at the front here. What I found is the people that have read have found it an extraordinary experience. On top of that, when I was reading here the other night, and as I'm reading tonight, I almost felt like there was another presence in the church, that there were other beings here listening to the Word of God being read, almost like there were angels in the church. I want to encourage you to try it and come and read. Most of the time you'll be reading by yourself, but the heavenly host is listening, and we're doing it over our church. I'm not sure the Bible has been read in the whole church from start to finish before. This is a first, I think, in Hildenborough. But all of us have found it a profoundly, deeply meaningful experience reading the Bible. And so I'm going to read now. Nothing exciting about my reading, but reading the Word of God and speaking it out. It says in the Bible that faith comes by hearing the Word. So we're starting in 1 Samuel now, and I'm coming to 1 Samuel 30. David and his men reached Ziklag on the third day. I think I've got that wrong, actually. It's because I went on to turn on the streaming. I think I got to 1 Samuel 28, not 30. Here we go. In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces to fight against Israel. Achish said to David, "You must understand that you and your men will accompany me in the army." David said, "Then you'll see for yourselves what your servant can do." Achish replied, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in his own town of Ramah. Saul had expelled the mediums and spiritists from the land. The Philistines assembled and came to set up camp at Shunem, while Saul gathered all Israel and set up camp at Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was afraid. Terror filled his heart. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or Urim or prophets. Saul then said to his attendants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, so that I may go and inquire of her." "There is one in Endor," they said. So Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and at night he and 2 men went to the woman. "Consult a spirit for me," he said, "and bring up for me the one I name." But the woman said to him, "Surely you know what Saul has done. He has cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why have you set a trap for my life to bring about my death?" Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this." Then the woman asked, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" "Bring up Samuel," he said. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out at the top of her voice and said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." The king said to her, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" The woman said, "I see a ghostly figure coming up out of the earth." "What does he look like?" he asked. "An old man wearing a robe is coming up," she said. And Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" "I'm in great distress," Saul said. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or by dreams. So I've called on you to tell me what to do." Samuel said, "Why do you consult me now that the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to one of your neighbors, to David, because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites. The Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." Immediately Saul fell full length on the ground, filled with fear because of Samuel's words. His strength was gone, for he had eaten nothing all that day and all that night. When the woman came to Saul and saw that he was greatly shaken, she said, "Look, your servant has obeyed you. I took my life in my hands and did what you told me to do. Now please listen to your servant and let me give you some food so that you may eat and have strength to go on your way." He refused and said, "I will not eat." But his men joined the woman in urging him, and he listened to them. He got up from the ground and sat on the couch. The woman had a fattened calf at the house, which she slaughtered at once. She took some flour, kneaded it, and baked bread without yeast. And she set it before Saul and his men, and they ate. And that same night they got up and left. The Philistines gathered all their forces at Aphek, and Israel camped by the spring in Jezreel. As the Philistines' rulers marched with their units of hundreds and thousands, David and his men were marching at the rear with Achish. The commanders of the Philistines asked, "What about these Hebrews?" Achish replied, "Is this not David, who was an officer of Saul, king of Israel? He had already been with me for over a year, and from the day he left Saul until now, I have found no fault in him." But the Philistine commanders were angry with Achish and said, "Send the man back, that he may return to the place you assigned him. He must not go with us into battle, or he will turn against us during the fighting. How better could he regain his master's favor than by taking the heads of our own men? Isn't this David they sang about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." So Achish called David and said to him, "As surely as the Lord lives, you have been reliable, and I will be pleased for you to serve with me in the army. From the day you came to me until today, I have found no fault in you. But the rulers don't approve of you. Now turn back and go in peace, do nothing to displease the Philistine rulers." "But what have I done?" asked David. "What have you found against your servant from the day I came to you until now? Why can't I go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Achish answered, "I know that you have been as pleasing in my eyes as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the Philistine commanders have said, 'He must not go up with us into battle.' Now get up early, along with your master's servants who have come with you, and leave in the morning as soon as it's light." So David and his men got up early in the morning to go back to the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Chapter 30, 1 Samuel chapter 30. David and his men reached Ziklag on the third day. Now the Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag. They had attacked Ziklag and burnt it, and taken captive the women and everyone else in it, both young and old. They killed none of them, but carried them off as they went on their way. When David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. David's two wives who had been captured, Ahinoam and Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. Then David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." Abiathar brought it to him, and David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" "Pursue them," he answered. "You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue." So David and the 600 men with him came to the Besor Valley, where some stayed behind. 200 of them were too exhausted to cross the valley, but David and the other 400 continued the pursuit. They found an Egyptian in a field and brought him to David. They gave him water to drink and food to eat, part of a cake of pressed figs and 2 cakes of raisins. He ate and was revived, for he had not eaten any food or drunk any water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David asked him, "Who do you belong to? Where do you come from?" And he said, "I'm an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me when I became ill 3 days ago. We raided the Negev of the Kerethites, some territory belonging to Judah, and the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag." And David asked him, "Can you lead me down to this raiding party?" And he answered, "Swear to me before God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I will take you down to them." He led David down, and there they were, scattered over the countryside, eating, drinking, and reveling, because of the great amount of plunder they'd taken from the land of the Philistines and from Judah. David fought them from dusk until the evening of the next day, and none of them got away, except 400 young men who rode off on camels and fled. David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, boy or girl, plunder or anything else they had taken. David brought everything back. He took all the flocks and herds, and his men drove them ahead of the other livestock, saying, "This is David's plunder." And David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow him and who were left behind at the Besor Valley. They came out to meet David and the men with him. As David and his men approached, he asked them how they were. But all the evil men and troublemakers among David's followers said, "Because they did not go out with us, we will not share with them the plunder we recovered. However, each man may take his wife and children and go." David replied, "Now, my brothers, you must not do that with what the Lord has given us. He has protected us and delivered into our hands the raiding party that came against us. Who will listen to what you say? The share of the man who stayed with the supplies is to be the same as that of him who went down to battle. All share alike." David made this statute and ordinance for Israel from that day to this. When David reached Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder to the elders of Judah who were his friends, saying, "Here is a gift for you from the plunder of the Lord's enemies." David sent it to those who were in Bethel, Ramoth, Negev, and Jattir, to those in Aroer, Sipmoth, Eshtemoa, and Rakal, to those in the towns of the Jerahmeelites and the Kenites, to those in Hormah, Bor-Ashan, and Athak, and Hebron, and to those in all the other places where he and his men had roamed. Chapter 31 from 1 Samuel. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, Malchishua. And the fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me." But the armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. And when the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together that same day. When the Israelites along the valley and those across the Jordan saw the Israelite army had fled, and that Saul and his sons had died, they abandoned their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped him of his armor. They sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtoreth's and fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. When the people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their valiant men marched for the night to Bethshan. They took down the bodies of Saul and his sons from the walls of Bethshan and went to Jabesh, where they burned them. Then they took the bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. We now come to 2 Samuel. After the death of Saul, David returned from striking down the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the 3rd day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. And when he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. "Where have you come from?" David asked him. He answered, "I've escaped from the Israelite camp." "What happened?" David asked. "Tell me." "The men fled from the battle," and he replied, "many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." Then David said to the young man who brought him the report, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa," the young man said, "and there was Saul leaning on a spear with the chariots and their drivers in hot pursuit. And when he turned around and saw me, he called out to me and said, 'What can I do?' He asked me, 'Who are you?' 'An Amalekite,' I answered. Then he said to me, 'Stand here by me and kill me. I am in the throes of death, but I'm still alive.' So I stood beside him and killed him, because I knew that after he'd fallen he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm, and I brought them here to my Lord." Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Paul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of Saul, and for the nation of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who brought him the report, "Where are you from?" "I am the son of a foreigner, an Amalekite," he answered. David asked him, "Why weren't you afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" And David called one of his men and said, "Go strike him down." So he struck him down and he died. But David had said to him, "Your blood be on your own head. Your own mouth testified against you when you said, 'I killed the Lord's anointed.'" David took up from his lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan. And he ordered the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Jashar. "A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel, how the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. Mounts of Gilboa, may you have neither dew, nor rain, may no showers fall on your terraced fields. For there the shield of the mighty was despised, the shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, the sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, and they were stronger than lions. Daughter of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your height. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me, and your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. Well, I'm going to have a little break now. We are 2 Samuel, starting at chapter 2. I've been doing probably about nearly 40 minutes. So I'm going to have a 5-minute break and then carry on. If you still want to sign up, you're very welcome to come into church tonight. If you want to join me, I can. We've got an hour and a half. There's no one else here to read. If anyone wants watching this and wants to come and do some reading for 15 minutes, I'd welcome you here. Or you can sign up at the back of church tomorrow. The first 3 slots tomorrow morning are at 7:45 in the morning, 8:30, 8:45 or 9, then 9:45, 10, 10:15 and 10:30, and then at 2:15 right to 5 o'clock is free. Then 18:45 to 19:15 is free, then 8:30 right up to 11:15, then I'm back on for the late shift at 11:30 till 12 o'clock.